Brock Lesnar is many things: a beast, a trash talker, a top-notch fight athlete, and probably the most hated man in the UFC. Want to know why? Then stick with us to find out why Brock Lesnar is hated by other UFC fighters. Alright, before we jump right into why a bunch of UFC wrestlers can't stand Lesnar, let's take a quick trip down memory lane. Brock Edward Lesnar, born on July 12, 1977, was a collegiate wrestler at the University of Minnesota. He even won the NCAA Division I National Championship in 2000. Then, he took the wrestling world by storm, signing with the World Wrestling Federation and becoming a household name by clinching the WWE Championship at just 25 years old, setting a record as the youngest champion ever. After his WWE stint, Lesnar decided to try his luck in the NFL, joining the Minnesota Vikings in 2004. Unfortunately, he got the boot during the preseason, but hey, he didn't let that setback stop him. He bounced back to wrestling, this time with NJPW in 2005, where he won the IWGP Heavyweight Championship. Lesnar then moved on from NJPW but kept his heavyweight championship status, this time with IGF. But wait, that's not all. He took a break from wrestling to dive into the world of MMA. Fast forward to 2012, and he's back in the WWE, breaking records left and right. His first reign with the WWE Universal Championship lasted a whopping 504 days, making it the 7th longest world championship reign in WWE history. Plus, he's the record holder for the most reigns as Universal Champion at 3. Lesnar's resume is quite stacked. Not only did he dominate in wrestling, but he also conquered the Royal Rumble not once but twice in 2003 and 2022. Plus, he won the Money in the Bank ladder match in 2019, snatched the King of the Ring crown in 2002, and headlined WrestleMania a whopping 5 times. And let's not forget about his 9 SummerSlam showdowns, and that epic moment when he ended The Undertaker's legendary WrestleMania streak in 2014. Lesnar's MMA journey kicked off in 2007, and then he made his way to the UFC in 2008. Boom! Just like that, he snatched up the UFC Heavyweight Championship in no time. But then, the dreaded diverticulitis hit him in 2009, putting him on the sidelines. Fast forward to 2010, and he's back in action, taking down interim UFC heavyweight champ Shane Carwin to become the undisputed UFC heavyweight champion. What started as a sideshow turned into a major headline, with Lesnar shining as one of the UFC's biggest stars in the late 2000s. But hey, life's not all sunshine and rainbows. He faced some losses and more battles with diverticulitis, leading him to hang up his gloves in 2011. But he made a comeback at UFC 200 in 2016, taking down Mark Hunt. However, things got a bit messy when his victory was overturned due to a positive drug test. That didn't stop him from being a box office hit, though. He rocked some of the best-selling pay-per-view events in UFC history, headlining UFC 91, UFC 100, UFC 116, and UFC 121, and even co-headlining UFC 200. Despite his early exit from the sport, Lesnar remains one of the most iconic figures in UFC history. Lesnar is an incredibly physical, strong, and hard-hitting athlete. He is called the Beast for a reason. A man who was a fantastic amateur wrestler and dominated the world of UFC, meaning he brings a style that very few can match. But he's not exactly well-liked in the UFC. You might be wondering why Brock is the most despised wrestler in the UFC. Maybe it's because his debut caused a stir like no other fighter before, or it could be his lack of technical finesse. Whenever folks doubt Lesnar's rank among MMA heavyweights, they bring up his limited experience. With just 7 fights under his belt, Lesnar's 2 record draws some hate. Or perhaps it's because signing a pro wrestler like Lesnar felt like a jab at the UFC's credibility. What with his trash-talking and dominant persona, Dana White and crew must have seemed a bit nuts. Maybe they were, but there are wrestlers with their own beef against Lesnar too. Just take a look at Chael Sonnen. He thinks Brock Lesnar's wins are because of size, not skill. It's pretty obvious that Brock Lesnar's a big fella, standing tall at 6'3" inches and tipping the scales at about 265 pounds during his UFC days. His chest spanned a whopping 56 inches, and his biceps were a solid 21. And that head of his? looked like it was carved from solid concrete. Even in a world full of physical specimens, Lesnar was in a league of his own. Chael Sonnen isn't one to bite his tongue, and he's made it pretty clear that he thinks Brock Lesnar, just like his old rival Anderson Silva, isn't all that great. Sonnen's never been shy about sharing his 2 cents on MMA fighters and whatever's making headlines in the fight game. After hanging up his gloves, he smoothly transitioned into the broadcasting world, hosting a bunch of ESPN gigs and running his own podcast. From grappling promoter to MMA analyst to retired fighter, he's basically done it all. He kicked off his MMA journey back in 1997, making waves in the UFC across both the light heavyweight and middleweight divisions. Despite taking shots at UFC titles, he never quite won a major championship. Sonnen also left his mark in World Extreme Cage Fighting, Pancrase, and most recently, Bellator MMA. Renowned for his razor-sharp tongue, he's often hailed as one of the best fighters never to clinch a major MMA world title and is celebrated as one of the sport's greatest trash talkers. Now, Sonnen and Lesnar are no strangers to the promo game. Lesnar's a heavyweight in the wrestling world, nailing the role of the bad guy in both WWE and UFC circles. Back in their UFC days and even back to their NCAA wrestling roots, Sonnen and Lesnar were both top dogs on the mat. Lesnar grabbed the NCAA heavyweight wrestling title in 2000 at Minnesota, while Sonnen held his own in the Pac-10 conference over at Oregon. Lesnar and Sonnen are both retired from MMA, despite rumors that Lesnar was interested in a potential return to compete for the UFC heavyweight title. Sonnen left the fight game after his loss to Lyoto Machida at Bellator 222 in 2019. Despite Lesnar's marketing prowess, Sonnen isn't sold on his Octagon achievements. In his chat on his Beyond the Fight YouTube gig, Sonnen spilled the beans, claiming that Lesnar's UFC wins were mainly thanks to his massive frame and not his natural talents. "Nobody else talks about it," Sonnen said. "I bring it up to try to prove a point. When you have Francis Ngannou, who's 260 pounds of steel, and you put him in with Stipe Miocic, who's 230 pounds, there are 30 pounds the right way disadvantage to Stipe. Brock Lesnar does not enjoy my company. I've been around Brock, and he's been a gentleman, but I can tell he'd rather be anywhere else but me. But one point that I make about Brock, it's not meant to slight him. Brock was not a very good wrestler, that's true. Brock never had Olympic aspirations. Brock was 265 pounds of steel. In the NCAA finals, he took on someone who weighed 220 pounds. There is a 45-pound weight discrepancy. It's a fair point by me, and it irritates Brock. But I'm right. I am right when I say it about Francis. Whether he's right or not, it doesn't really matter. Brock still climbed the ranks in the fighting world. Chael Sonnen is not the only wrestler vocal about not liking Brock Lesnar. Mark Hunt is another wrestler who's not exactly singing Lesnar's praises. But Hunt has a pretty solid reason behind his beef. Let's be real, Brock's WWE background definitely gave him a leg up in the UFC game, making his journey in the Octagon easier. Sometimes it's a little too easy. Mark Hunt, aka the Super Samoan, was set to face off against Lesnar on the main card of UFC 200 in 2016. It was all about cranking up the star power for a massive pay-per-view bash. Now, here's the thing. Lesnar had been away from the MMA scene for nearly 5 years. The UFC, wanting to fast-track his comeback, decided to forego the usual USADA testing song and dance for this matchup. Fast forward to fight night, and guess what? Lesnar snatched the win via unanimous decision. But plot twist, 2 failed drug tests popped up later on, flipping the result to a no contest. Lesnar tested positive for drug use. Cue Mark Hunt sliding into legal action mode in 2017. After Lesnar's positive test, the Nevada State Athletic Commission scrapped the decision and slapped him with a 1-year MMA ban. Hunt hasn't been shy about voicing his frustration with the UFC for allowing the fight to happen despite Lesnar's positive pre-fight test. Usually, the UFC requires fighters to undergo 4 months of drug testing before returning to action. But they made an exception for Lesnar's comeback, announcing him as the co-main event for UFC 200 on June 4th, just a month before the July 9th pay-per-view. Hunt didn't take this lightly. In his lawsuit, he accused the UFC, Lesnar, and White of racketeering and fraud. Also, Lesnar earned a cool $2.5 million for the fight, with the NSAC snagging a $250,000 fine for his drug use. On the other hand, Hunt pocketed $700,000. Before taking legal action, Hunt tried to negotiate with the UFC, aiming for a chunk of Lesnar's purse, but that didn't fly. According to Hunt, the penalties don't hit hard enough. Although it's not that they're weak on paper, it's just that the UFC isn't enforcing them like they should. But things didn't quite go his way in court. Eventually, the rulings came down against him, with the appeals court reversing the decision. Not gonna lie. It feels pretty unjust that Brock got off with just a slap on the wrist for doping. You might think Mark Hunt and Chael Sonnen have some serious beef with Brock Lesnar, but compared to Frank Mir, that's just a drop in the bucket. Frank straight up despised Brock to the point where he probably dreamt about killing him. Yeah, it's that serious. Now, trash talking is practically ingrained in the fighting DNA. From Ali and Foreman's epic showdowns to the WWE's over-the-top theatrics, combat sports history is drenched in verbal sparring and smack talk. And the fun part? Promoters eat it all up. There's nothing quite like a good old-fashioned feud to amp up the excitement and sell out those arenas. Sometimes, though, the drama falls flat. Fighters might try to stir up trouble, but if there's no real beef, fans won't buy into it. But then there are those rare occasions when the hate is all too real. Case in point, Frank Mir and Brock Lesnar. Their feud? It's etched in UFC history as one of the fiercest ever. Now, Frank Mir's no stranger to feud, but his clash with Lesnar? That's the stuff of legends. So Frank Mir versus Brock Lesnar. How did it all start? It all started off back in 2008 when Lesnar, fresh from the WWE, stepped into the Octagon to face Mir. Right from the get-go, Lesnar's brute force had Mir on the ropes, nearly knocking him out cold. Big things were definitely on Lesnar's horizon, and stepping into the Octagon with Mir right off the bat spoke volumes. Leading up to the fight, Mir didn't hold back, taking shots at Lesnar's wrestling fame in the fake world. When the bell rang, Lesnar wasted no time showing off his brute strength. He took Mir down early and unleashed a barrage of blows, looking like a force to be reckoned with. But here's where experience paid off. Mir seized the moment when Lesnar slipped up for just a moment, locking in a knee bar and forcing him to tap out. It was a blow to Lesnar's ego. Not only did he suffer his first UFC loss, but he did it with a rookie mistake after such a promising start. Ouch. After their initial fight, Mir went on to claim the interim heavyweight title by defeating Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira. Meanwhile, Lesnar bounced back with a win over Heath Herring, earning himself a shot at Randy Couture's heavyweight title. And guess what? He won the title with a second-round knockout. But let's get back to the beef between Mir and Lesnar. 1 year later, they were on a collision course once again, and Lesnar was hungry for revenge. At UFC 100, he got his chance and didn't hold back. In just 2 rounds, he pummeled Mir with heavy punches, defending his UFC heavyweight title in impressive fashion. To add insult to injury, as Mir was coming to, Lesnar got right up in his face, screaming his victory. There were rumors flying about a potential rematch, but that's all it was. Since then, Frank Mir's been holding on to that grudge tighter than a pit bull with a bone. The bad blood from their rematch. It was next-level intense, even for the UFC. Lesnar may have crossed the line in the cage, but Mir wasn't holding back in the press either. His hatred boiled over to the point where he wished death upon Lesnar in what's got to be one of the most brutal interviews in UFC history. Speaking to Mark Madden on WXDX Radio in 2010, Mir ensured that no one questioned the credibility of his beef with Lesnar. Mir didn't hold back, saying, "I'd rather go ahead and say what's on my mind than to sit there and come up with some PC. Oh, the guy is a great fighter and I have a lot of respect for him. If I don't mean it, why is it even coming out of my mouth? I hate who he is as a person. I want to break his neck in the Octagon, and I want him to be the first person that dies due to Octagon-related injuries." Mir's hate for Lesnar went way beyond the cage. He couldn't stand Lesnar's loud and angry persona, especially the idea of kids looking up to him as a role model. It made Mir cringe to think that being big, obnoxious, and angry was seen as admirable. "We've got some serious beef. Everything he stands for, I can't stand, and vice versa. I'll be honest, "I don't like him as a person at all," Mir said. Dana White called him out for his comments, so Mir backtracked and apologized to Lesnar, his family, the UFC, and the fans, who admitted he had stepped out of line. But just days later, he doubled down, insisting he did nothing wrong. "I mean, come on. It was a joke, right? I've heard worse stuff said about this being a fight to the death. And Brock talking about pulling a horseshoe out of my rear, no one seemed too bothered by that," Mir retorted. As for sorting things out with Lesnar, not quite. In 2010, Mir tried to channel his anger into a fight with Shane Carwin, whom he dubbed a better Lesnar. But despite months of preparation, Mir couldn't pull off the upset and got knocked out in the first round. And then in 2016, Mir tested positive for turinabol metabolites, leading to his release from the UFC, despite having 6 fights left on his contract. Tough break. Moving on, Cain Velasquez doesn't exactly despise Lesnar, though he does find him a tad irritating. Velasquez dove headfirst into the MMA scene when he was fresh out of college, joining the American Kickboxing Academy and honing his skills under top-notch coaches. From there, it's a whirlwind of victories for Velasquez as he showcased his skills in the Octagon. He wasn't just any fighter, he's a brown belt in guerrilla jiu-jitsu and a black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, with NCAA Division I wrestling chops to boot. With each fight, Velasquez proved himself a force to be reckoned with, taking down opponents left and right with his lethal combination of striking and grappling. He made his UFC debut in style, delivering TKO after TKO and racking up wins like it's nobody's business. Throughout his career, Velasquez battled injuries, setbacks, and unexpected challenges, but he never backed down. And in the end, Cain Velasquez called it quits from the MMA scene on October 11, 2019. It wasn't just about winning belts and titles for Velasquez, it was about facing the best of the best and proving his mettle. And that's why he was able to square off against heavyweight giants like Brock Lesnar. Speaking of Lesnar, Velasquez's relationship with the big guy is, well, let's just say it's complicated. While Velasquez might not exactly see eye to eye with Lesnar, he doesn't harbor any real hatred towards him, even if he does find him a bit on the annoying side. Let's rewind to October 23, 2010, when Cain squared off against Brock Lesnar at UFC 121 and totally beat the crap out of him. After the fight, Cain found it a bit odd that Brock's in-ring character wasn't just an act. It was his real-life persona, too. Now here's the deal with Brock. His in-your-face attitude isn't just for show in the Octagon. Nope, he carries that swagger outside, too. Brock's all about being cocky and brash, never missing a chance to throw shade at his opponents with just a smirk and some subtle arrogance. He's a rebel who loves nothing more than taking down the big names and staining their legacies. His outspoken, hard-nosed, grizzled attitude often expels the ordinary characteristics of a professional MMA fighter. Lesnar says what's on his mind, never backs down in the media, and neglects to respect the historic accomplishments of his often legendary opponents. So it's no wonder other fighters might not be his biggest fans, right? Up next, we've got Conor McGregor, who's never had his own run-in with Lesnar but can't stand him either. Conor McGregor has some serious skills in the Octagon, and he is known for his deadly counter-strikes, precise striking, and knockout power. Most of his wins in MMA come from knocking his opponents out cold or TKOs with his killer punches. And outside the cage? Well, let's just say McGregor's not one to hold back. He's all about the trash talk, earning him the badass nickname, The Notorious. But McGregor's no stranger to stirring up trouble with his antics. Normally, McGregor isn't one to dismiss everyone in the WWE world. He's got respect for the big shots, like the McMahons, Triple H, and The Rock. Those are the real bosses in his eyes. But when it comes to the rest of them, well, let's just say McGregor doesn't hold back with his words. So it wasn't really a surprise when he didn't hold back during a conference call on August 5th before his rematch with Nate Diaz at UFC 202. In classic Notorious fashion, he didn't miss the chance to throw shade at Brock and CM Punk. McGregor couldn't even be bothered to remember CM Punk's name. For the most part, those WWE guys are pussies, to be honest. They're messed up pussies if you ask me. Fair play to Brock. He got in and fought. But at the end of the day, he was juiced up to the fucking eyeballs. So how can I respect that? And then what's the other guy? The other guy hasn't fought yet, so I don't know about him yet. Now, some folks in the MMA scene took McGregor's comments as him shutting down any WWE involvement. But knowing McGregor, he's probably just setting the stage for some future money-making scheme or storyline. He's all about that business and knows how to stir up some buzz, whether it's real or scripted. Brock Lesnar, on the other hand, seems to share McGregor's sentiment. When asked about a potential match with McGregor, Lesnar didn't mince words, basically saying McGregor's size doesn't measure up. I take shits bigger than that kid, all right. Come on, guys. I know you guys all play video games and you live in this fucking false sense of reality and shit. I'm 290 pounds, all right. This guy is 145 pounds. That's if he's lucky. Gets up and eats his fucking Wheaties, okay? All right? Well, damn, Brock. But hey, that's just how it goes. Lesnar might be the most polarizing figure in the UFC, but haters gonna hate, right? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section, and before you leave, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Octagon Rivals so you don't miss the next ones.